I'm very honored to be here with you. I went to this school 60 years ago. That's a long time. And I made a lot of mistakes. And I'm here to tell you guys, all of you, about not to make the mistakes that I made and how to be a success. Is there anybody here in this room that ever had a dream of being president of the United States? How about a doctor? Anybody here ever want to be a doctor? Right on. How about a lawyer? Nice. Teacher? Good. Nurse? Airline pilot? All the good stuff. You want to have a good life? You got to do the right things. I want to tell you my story. I hope you will take a lesson from what happened to me. 60 years ago, I went to this school, and for some reason, knock off the laughing. For some reason, I decided I didn't need school. I made a big mistake. And I wasn't going to school. I was playing hooky. And you know what happened to me? One day, the principal called me into his office, and he said, "You're out of here." You think I wasn't ashamed of myself? I got kicked out. See, I was here on a permit. I came from a neighborhood called Humboldt Park. So I got kicked out, and I had to go to another school that was in the district that I lived in, and that was called Thule, which is now Roberto Clemente. You've probably heard of that. Pardon?
She heard it.
Oh, you heard? I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you. Yeah, Roberto Clemente. So I was ashamed, and about 6 months later, I called. Can you hear me okay on the mic? I called the principal at Roosevelt, and I said, "I'm very sorry for what I did. Would you take me back? I miss my buddies." And he said, he was a great guy. He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. If you stop screwing around, if you could get a B average, if you go to school every day, you can come back to Roosevelt." So I did it. And I came back to Roosevelt. But you know what the problem was? My grades were so bad, it took me 4.5 years to graduate from Roosevelt High School because I wasn't going to summer school. And out of 187 kids in my graduating class, I was 186. Pretty bad, huh? So I thought, I'm in big trouble. My life is over. So I want to tell you what happened to me and how I made a comeback and how you can do what I did. Now I'm looking at every one of you here. I want you to listen to what I have to tell you. I'm no different than you. I'm not smarter than you. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a genius, got a regular IQ. If you want to succeed and do what I did, what do you think you have to do? Anybody know the answer?
Work hard.
Yes, ma'am. Work hard. You know, the great basketball player in Chicago, Derrick Rose, how do you think he's so great?
Because he worked hard.
Works hard. Everybody who ever succeeds works hard. It's not given to them. So here's what happened to me. Now, by the way, I was lucky. I was able to come back. Don't you do what I did, because you won't get a second break. But here's what happened to me. I finally graduated high school after 4.5 years, and my best friend said to me, "We're never going to go to college, so let's you and I join the Army." So I said, okay. He said, we'll become generals. Well, I was so uneducated and so uninformed that I didn't know you can't become a general if you didn't go to college. You can't become any kind of an officer unless you go to officer candidate school. I didn't know that. So we went in on the buddy system. The buddy system lasted only through basic training. I went to Korea. How many of you know where Korea, heard of Korea? That's where I went. And my friend went to Texas to be a cook. When I went to Korea, it was primitive. We lived in huts. It's called Quonset huts. Will you believe we had no electricity? We had no running water. We had no bathrooms. I mean, it was tough. And I was there in Korea for 16 and a half months. Now I come home and I have no education. My father came from Poland. You've heard of Poland. And my father was able to leave Poland before Adolf Hitler got there, because if you did your homework in history, you know that Adolf Hitler killed many people who lived in Poland. And my father got out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So I came home from Korea. I was 20 years old. And my father waited about a week, and he talked to me. And he said to me, what are you going to do with your life? So I said, Dad, I want to do what you do. My father was a house painter. I said, I want to be a house painter like you. And you know what my father said? He said, it's tough. He said, man, that's tough. You're going to come home, you're going to have paint all over your eyes, fumes in your lungs. He says, why don't you be a lawyer? I said, how can I be a lawyer when I got thrown out of high school? I never read books. I can't do it. And you know what my father told me? You can do it. And you know what? I believed him. So I said, Dad, I want to be a painter. And he put me painting closets in the projects. And I came home on the third day. I had a lot of paint on my face. I said, Dad, I'm going to be a lawyer. We got to figure this out. So the problem was we had no money. We had no money. The guys I grew up with were poor. There's a guy here in the audience that I'm going to introduce you to. He was poor. He lived above a pool room, and he shared a bed with his brother. If I were to walk up to one of my buddies when I was growing up, and I'd say, Al, you have change for $1? He'd say, I don't carry that kind of cash. So we didn't have money. So I said to my father, Dad, if I'm going to be a lawyer, how am I going to do it? I don't have money to pay for school. I have to get jobs. I have to go part-time. I said, it'll probably take me more than 4 years to get my bachelor's degree, and then to go to law school, maybe another 4 years. And you know what my father told me? He said, so what? He said, 8 years is going to come, and 8 years will go. And you will be a lawyer, and you know what? You're going to walk into court, and the judge is going to call you counselor. And people will pay you great respect. And not only that, he said, you're going to make a good living, so you'll be able to take care of your kids. And if your kids come to you and say, Dad, I need braces, you could buy it. And you could drive a nice car. You could have a nice house. So I set out a plan for myself. And I got a job. I drove a taxi cab. You all know what the yellow cab is? I drove it. I drove a yellow cab, and I went to college part-time. I went to Wright Junior College. I got my associate in arts degree, and then I went to Roosevelt University. Sometimes I would drive my cab up to the school. In those days, they had meters on the outer drive, and I'd put money in the meter, and I'd take a class. You know what? I graduated from college. I got a college degree. And then I said, I'm going to do better than that. I want to be a lawyer. So I got a job as a school teacher. I taught high school. I used to sleep 3-4 hours a night. I teach high school. I go to law school at night. And I kept driving and driving and driving. You know what would have stopped me? Death. Only death would have stopped me. I wanted to make a life for myself. You know what happened? I became a lawyer. Now I got thrown out of high school. I became a lawyer. And then I became a professor at UCLA. I did that for 30 years. I'm a boxer. I got inducted into California Boxing Hall of Fame. And I kept going and driving because I wanted to have a good life. And then I became a policeman. I'm a cop, sergeant. I did all those things, and I was thrown out of this school. So here's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you the truth. I'm no different than you. I'm a regular guy. I have a regular IQ. So if I can do it, you can do it. I want to talk to you a little bit about drugs. You've heard this stuff a million times. Who can tell me what kind of people use drugs? Well, I'll tell you. Chumps, hey, knock it off. Chumps and fools use drugs. Those are the only two people who use drugs. Chumps and fools. If you use drugs, your life is over. Now, as a lawyer, I was the chief in the LA County Public Defender's Office. I supervised 400 lawyers. I tried over 100 jury trials. I represented drug addicts. If you look at a meth freak, that's called crank, and look at what they do to their face, their nose disappears, their face looks like a prune, they ruin their looks. Same thing with crack cocaine. Only a moron would do that to themselves. So that's number one, no drugs. And I want to tell you what you should do every day. Every time you read a book, you'll have a better life. Every time you get an A on your report card, you will have a better life. When you go to school every day, by the way, if you have any friends that tell you forget about school, you know what you should do? Run. Get rid of them. Only hang around with winners. Do not hang around with losers. Only hang around with people who want to have a good life and that are decent people. And if you got any friends who tell you to use drugs, run. Get away from them. They will ruin you. So here's what I recommend you do. You go to school every day. You listen to your teachers because they're smart. And you do your homework. Here's my recommendation to you. Come home from school, take a little break, have a little something to drink, have a cookie, whatever it is, take a 15-minute break, and then guess what? Hit the books. Sit down, find a quiet place, a desk, a table, no radio, no TV, no cell phones, no texting. Sit down and hit the books. And I promise you, if you do this, every day you will have a great life. The only way to succeed, education. So that's my message to you. I want to tell you that in this audience we have a guy who's a legend. Hey man, knock it off with the gum and all that stuff. Stop it. We got a guy in this office, in this room, who was the greatest athlete that ever came out of Roosevelt High School. He won 10 letters. He was a poor kid. He lived in my neighborhood above a pool hall. His father owned a tiny liquor store. in our neighborhood, and my buddy Fred grew it into the largest retail wine businesses in the country. He's the greatest athlete that ever came out of Roosevelt. And a couple of years back, he got a letter from our ex-principal at Roosevelt High School, who used to be the football coach. I want to read you this. I'll show you what a guy can do with his life. Dear Fred, this is on Roosevelt alumni stationery. As you know, I've been part of Roosevelt High School for a longer period of time than any other Rough Rider. I entered Roosevelt in 1937 as a freshman, and I've been involved with our school as a student, football coach, teacher, counselor, and I also was the principal. During the last 25 years, I served as the editor of our Roosevelt Alumni News, and from 1937 to 2005 is a very long stretch. I assume most alumni feel my knowledge of past graduates and the history of our school is as good as it gets. So now let me tell you why I wrote the letter. While checking old yearbooks and reading clippings about school athletic history, one person stands out, a young man named Fred Rosen. Not only were you one of the best athletes the school ever produced, you're the only athlete that ever earned 10, check this out, 10 major varsity athletic letters. No one has ever achieved this feat in the 78 years Roosevelt has been opened, and I don't think it'll ever happen again. You followed this success in college, in your later life as a good family man, terrific businessman, and a great guy. Fred, in the early 60s, the last 3 years I coached football, our record was 29-1-1. But if I had Fred Rosen around, it would have read 30-0. Freddie, would you stand up? What do you think of that story? So that's my message to you, and it would make me very happy if you would remember what I said and make a good life for yourself, be decent people, do your homework, respect your teachers and your parents, no drugs, no booze, just drive straight ahead, get an education, and have a good life. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Oh yeah, are there any boxing fans here? None of the guys are boxing fans? Oh yeah, of course. How many of you guys have heard of the greatest trainer that ever lived, Freddie Roach? He trains Manny Pacquiao, Mike Tyson.
Oh, yeah, I heard of Mike Tyson.
Yeah, he trained Mike Tyson, he trained Oscar De La Hoya. He's my buddy. I represented him. By the way, I am the attorney for the California Boxing Hall of Fame. I was the attorney for the World Boxing Hall of Fame. I represented many world champions. I never charged any of them, and so I was inducted into the California Boxing Hall of Fame as an amateur boxer and for all of the achievements I made to boxing over my lifetime. So I'll tell you very briefly how I got into it. I raised my son by myself. I got him into boxing. I got hooked. I started boxing. I've had a lot of amateur fights, and I still box to this day, and I love it. I still do, yeah. I box at Freddie Roach's gym. Pardon? 75.
Oh my gosh, he outlived.
Now,
No, he don't look that old.
check it out. Take it up.
Oh, okay.
I got a nice right hand. Now, you know what happens when you get older? I'm a pretty big guy. The last thing that goes is the power. I got power. But when you get older, the legs go, you know, and the power comes from the legs and the hips. People that don't know about boxing, you know how they fight? Like this? That's called arm punches. So after about 1 minute, you can't breathe. You know, a boxer fight? From the hips.
Okay.
So I could fight. Any of you see the Mayweather fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great fighter. Mayweather's one of the great fighters. But I know many world champions. I know ex-heavyweight champions. I know welterweights, middleweights, and I still box. Yeah, every once a week I go up there and I do it. Any other questions? All right, it's been an honor to talk to you, and do what you got. Freddie, here, come on up.
I wasn't expecting to say anything. I just came to see my old friend. He's 2 years younger than me. We all hung out in the same neighborhood, Humboldt Park, badass neighborhoods, you know. And we took 2 buses to get to Roosevelt High School, which was one of the greatest high schools in Chicago. It still is, and you get a good education here. And he was just as big a bum as he said he was. Everything he said was true. We saw some nutty kid run around the neighborhood, but he showed you can do it if you motivate yourself. And this school produced Chicago's finest for many, many years. I started here in 1950, and it was a great experience in my life. I took 2 buses to get here, and all you guys follow his example and just reach for the stars. You've heard all this bullshit before, but it's the truth. You got to make a goal, and you can do it. There's nobody stopping you. Thanks for letting me speak here.
Thank you, Freddie.